Hello all. Welcome to the Stewardship Network's 16th conference. We are so pleased to be here with you today. We have folks coming in from 20 different states, 2 different countries, stewards from all walks of life, from students to professionals with years of experience in the field of land management, to university people, to municipal, state, federal, tribal agencies. So really pleased to be here with you today. What we're going to do is we'll kick it off here. Folks are still kind of getting their bearings and getting over to the stage and stuff, so just want to encourage you all to drop in the chat where you're tuning in from, as so many of you have. Let us know. We're really excited to be here with you for the next couple days. Really pleased to be able to make this event so accessible and so and to be able to, for all of you to sit from the comfort and safety of your own home. We heard of somebody who just flew down to Dallas for a conference, only to fly back because of ice and have a virtual conference. So we're really pleased that we've been planning to bring you all together virtually for this time. Happy World Wetland Day, happy Groundhog Day, looking forward to the full moon on Sunday. I want to thank all of you as speakers and sponsors for this event. This would not be possible without you, as well as you attendees. You really make this a very rich experience for all of our people. One of the things that I want to encourage you all to do is to make liberal use of the kind of networking and downtime that we have to reach out and communicate with other folks and network with them. What we're going to do here is I'm going to tell you a little bit about the Stewardship Network. I'll orient you to the virtual room. If you have any problems whatsoever, email staff@stewardshipnetwork.org. Also drop your issue into the chat. People are they help each other out a lot. People are familiar with this. This is our 3rd virtual year. So I want to welcome you all to the Stewardship Network's 2023 conference. As I said, we're going to kick this off here in just a moment. We want to let folks who are still finding their way over to the main stage, and so we're looking forward to holding this event with you over the next couple days. We've got a great program, a wonderful evening program of What Stories Does the Land Hold? So looking forward to that with you. So to begin, let's go ahead and kick this off. What I'm going to do is I'm going to tell you a little bit about the Stewardship Network for those of you who are new. And those of you who know the Stewardship Network, maybe you'll learn a little bit of something else. And then we'll orient you to the virtual room. And then we'll stay right here for the keynote. We'll do a Q&A from right here, and then from there you'll head to the session rooms. And this afternoon will all be afternoon on the East Coast time, will all be sessions and networking opportunities in between those times. I'll tell you a little bit more about that. And then we'll have a break for about an hour and a half, and then we'll be back to the program on What Stories Does the Land Hold? And then we'll be back here right on the main stage tomorrow morning. We'll then have sessions in the afternoon, and then we will go to our closing ceremony. So again, welcome. So glad to have you here. Looking forward to spending the next couple of days together. So I want to tell you a little bit about what stewardship means to the Stewardship Network. So we are all about stewardship, right? That's what we do. And what it means to us is, stewardship is the opposite of neglect. It implies a profound and responsibility that we accept and embrace. It's what we do. We know how important that is. And oftentimes that's intervention. It's prescribed fire, it's repairing riparian corridor habitat, it's doing invasive species control, and sometimes it's knowing when to abstain. And so maybe that's knowing that you're going to let the native seed bank regenerate, or maybe it means that you're not going to put the trail in this sensitive area. So we do what the land and water needs. I always say, fall in love with the land and listen to it, and fall in love with the water and listen to it. It gives us feedback on what's happening. And so folks say, oh, wait, isn't that conservation? And we think there are 2 vital halves of this equation. So the first is a preservation. So that's the really important work that so many of you do to protect natural areas and species from harmful human actions, right? All of the work that goes into that. Just talking Sybil, are you here? I know you're just about to set your land aside with the local land conservancy. So go ahead and drop in the chat. Let us know what are some of your favorite places that have been preserved. Let us know where you love to go for a walk, for a run, for a ski, for a photography session, for listening to birds. And then there's stewardship, right? So once that land is set aside, we need to assist it with helpful human actions to keep the ecological and cultural value that made it valuable in the first place. And so that's an important part of it. That's what we do here at the Stewardship Network, elevating and amplifying that. And we know that without stewardship, conservation is an incomplete investment. So preservation and conservation, stewardship is conservation. So there are different dynamics with those two things, right? So preservation is the successful ones that's followed by ribbon cuttings and high fives, and it's a great thing that ought to be celebrated, right? It's a really big moment. But stewardship is ongoing, right? It's the countless small moments, and it's easy to take for granted. So how many of you have been out there in the field alone doing stewardship work and feeling overwhelmed by it, or out with a volunteer work day or with your work crew, and it's easy to be overwhelmed by it. And that's kind of why the Stewardship Network started, because we wanted to share how many amazing people are outside doing that work each and every day. And there's a tendency to kind of under-celebrate and underfund that, and that's why we do the work that we do. We're actually working on 2 grant proposals with 2 of our member communities this week to make sure that they do have funding for this work. So it's kind of like somebody says, I graduated, right? So that's like the preservation. That's somebody's going to say, congratulations. Somebody says to you, I graduated. You're going to say, congratulations. You're going to think about maybe there's a party. Maybe people come into town for it. Your institution gives you a robe and you walk across a stage and get recognized and you receive a diploma. Those are those moments, those huge moments, like those preservation moments, that rightly should be celebrated. Versus somebody says to you, I've been exercising. And you say, cool, that's awesome. I love that. I'm so glad you are. But there's not a party for each one of those planks or each one of that mile you've run. And so it's an important part of that we celebrate and acknowledge and elevate. So if stewardship is vital and there's not enough of it out there, who's doing it? You all are, right? If you're here today, you are working on stewardship, whether that's directly or indirectly, either by learning about it, by funding it, by being out in nature, being connected with it. So we'd like to tell you a little bit about how the Stewardship Network does it. So for those of you new to us, we are a 501c3 nonprofit organization with a national and international award-winning 20-year history. So we'll, at one of the sessions this afternoon, Bob, Dave, and I will talk about some of the early days of the Stewardship Network and kind of where the field has come. We've been doing this for a long time. It was a really very new thing back in those days. Our reach extends from the Great Lakes to the Pacific Ocean. We've grown. We started right here in Southeast Michigan, and due to demand from folks all over the country, we've extended our member community model, where we currently serve 20 place-based member communities. And this has grown because people said to us, hey, this is really cool the way that you all are organizing, and we don't have anything like that in our area, and we'd like to do that in our area. And so that's how the Stewardship Network has grown to be now working from the Great Lakes to the Pacific Ocean. And the super neat thing about all of our member communities is that they are all collaborative. They're all made up of the organizations, agencies, individuals, private property owners, volunteers, students, contractors, and consultants. Everybody that cares for land and water in a given community is part of our member community program. And so one of the things about that is it's really rare that collection of stewards is able to be brought together in the same space. Typically, it might be only NGOs, it might be just land trusts and land conservancies, or it might just be the governmental folks at the federal level, or it might be just a group of private property owners. And so the cool thing is, with the Stewardship Network member communities, is that you're sitting around the table with all of the people who care for land and water in your community, and there's a lot of energy around that. The other thing that happens with that is typically in a given community, until a Stewardship Network member community starts, those people may not know each other. And when we first launch our member communities, one of the questions that I always ask, and so when we do those, we have an Exploring the Possibilities workshop, and I typically ask the question at the beginning, and there are between 35 and 125 people that come to those typically, depending on the community. And I ask the question, how many of you all know 100% of the people in the room? Of course, nobody. How many people know 90% of the room? Still nobody. How many people know 75% of the people in the room? Still nobody raises their hand. And then I get to 50, and there are 50%, and a few hands get raised. And then over the course of the time of the collaborative, they get to know each other and what they do and what they offer. And then stewardship all of the member communities engage in either direct stewardship of natural ecosystems, or they do it through education, empowerment, and advocacy. Maybe they harness the power of convening, or they harness the power of coordination, or they use art to celebrate stewardship, or they engage in the direct stewardship of the ecosystems. So our member communities, they're all stewards of their local land and water, but they get bogged down in all the administration and officey stuff. And so, for each one of them to make a website or figure out how to have a database and do event registration and all those kinds of things, they're repeating efforts. And then this is where the Stewardship Network comes in. We do all that officey stuff to keep them out in nature, connected with nature. We help them with tech. We do grant reporting. We do grant writing with them. We do all kinds of different things. We're working with the Great Lakes Islands Alliance. Peter, I saw that you were on already. Right now, working on a proposal for the Mott Foundation. And Lori, I know that you're on, and we're working with you on a proposal to the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation. Again, we want to keep you, that underfunded stewardship effort, we want to help ensure that there are funds there for you. We want to help you be able to do, if I said to many of you online, could you run a workshop? You could probably run workshops on 10 different topics. But if I also said to you, you need to book the location, and you need to do the registration, and you need to communicate with all the attendees, you'd say, I can't do that. I don't have time to do that. I can show up and run the workshop. So that's what the Stewardship Network does. We provide all of that backbone information. And then the really neat thing is that we teach each other as we go. And so we learn from the member communities. Member communities might say to us, so follow the graphic on the right and follow the arrows. A member community might say, hey, this is what we need. So typically, as I said, when we first start a member community, they don't know each other, and they also don't know necessarily, oh, like you do work days on the second Wednesday or the second Saturday? Oh, I do too, but now maybe I'll move it to the third Saturday so that we don't compete for volunteers. So we have a combined stewardship calendar, and then we're able to filter that down to, again, follow those arrows, down to the member communities, and so that they gain another resource that they didn't have when they first started. So we do that in lots of different ways, and the other great thing, again, follow the arrows, is that we learn from each other. So each year the coordinators are supported, and they have a coordinator summit that happens, and it's typically a 2-day retreat that happens where we focus on them as leaders and them working on things about facilitation and conflict wisdom, all kinds of other things. And really, programs have come out of that, like starting the Conservation Stewards Program in different locations, and it's a chance to really support them as coordinators of a very complex situation where you're bringing together all of these organizations and groups at different levels. So we have a musically talented group here at the Stewardship Network. And so we sometimes think about the label analogy in the same way. So Motown, iconic label, right? Musicians exist to make music. Again, they don't want to book the tours or the press releases, just like you all maybe want to share your knowledge, but you don't want to do the registration for something. And a good label shares the vision and centralizes the necessary back-end work so that when an individual win aids the whole in the reputation of the label, but individual setbacks are insulated by the family. So, for example, if a coordinator turns over in one of our member communities, we're there to help them. One of the things that happens sometimes as a coordinator, oh, we've had her as a coordinator for 5 years and she's going to step down. And how many of you can know of efforts where a strong individual has left the leadership role and the effort falters or fails? And so we're there to say, nope, we got you. We're the label here that makes sure that you stay strong here and that you're able to continue the work that you do and you're able to continue playing the songs that you play and providing the music that you do, even though that album might have been a bum album. So here are our sweet sounds of stewardship, right? So these are our member communities. And they, as we said earlier, they are in the Great Lakes and run to the Pacific coast. So we have above below, some examples of the kind of things that these do. Above below is celebrating and protecting kelp forests on the west coast of this country. We have the Great Lakes Islands Alliance that is made up of all of the year-round populated islands in the Great Lakes, the 20 year-round populated islands in the Great Lakes. They just brought together 100 islanders in October to learn from each other and to visit 5 different Lake Erie islands. They're sharing ideas and information across islands where typically, again, the islands might all need to be thinking of these things on their own. we're coming up with an event that's around an island-wide survey. And so how did one island do that and how might others do that? We have the Huron Arbor member community, and Huron Arbor is our original one that started here in Southeast Michigan in Washtenaw County. And just last Friday, there were 35 professional stewards out in the field visiting a wetland and learning about beaver, right? So beaver are making a comeback in Southeast Michigan, and so they're there to learn from each other, to ask questions, to do those kinds of things. We have our West Michigan Conservation Network that started in 2006. It started with 3 groups in a basement room that I was part of facilitating, bringing them together. And they now have more than 70 different groups that are working together, coordinating across boundaries, being that collaborative. They just held a workshop earlier this week on writing management plans. So our member communities are engaged in all kinds of different on-the-ground stewardship and learning and engagement activities, whether that's a discussion group or a workshop, public workshop, or a workshop for the professional stewards, or it's a networking learning session, engaged in all kinds of different elements of stewardship in a community. So, does that sound intriguing to you? If it does, and you're interested in learning about being a member community, you can visit us on the web at stewardshipnetwork.org/communities/new. There's a form there that you can fill out. We're actually talking with somebody right now about becoming a new member community, and so I encourage you all to go there. And we'd love to talk to you. We love this work. I've been doing this work. I've been part of the Stewardship Network since it started more than 20 years ago. It's actually getting on 25 years ago if you start the kind of project basis, not 501c3 part of the Stewardship Network. And I love my job because I get to work with you. I get to work with all of you amazing people who are doing tremendous things in your community. So then the other thing that you can do during the time here today and tomorrow is enter the expo hall. And the expo hall has some different things that I'll tell you about later, but it also has our events calendar. And so again, a great chance to learn different things that are going on in your community. If you have an event, you can post something there. And if you're looking for an event to go to, it's a really great resource. I was doing a webcast from one location one time, and somebody just saw me and she's like, "Oh, you're with the Stewardship Network? You know, I just went to Kalamazoo last weekend, and we found an event there that we could do. I was visiting my family, and so we found an event." So encourage you to do that. We've got our job board, and our job board is blowing up right now with field season coming up. You can find a job to apply to, or you can post your job there. And one of the things that somebody said to me one time in feedback is she said, all of our top candidates, we asked them where they heard about the job, and they all said the Stewardship Network job board. So encourage you to check out the job board, post something there. We've got our Gloves for Good program where we take gloves that have been lightly used in an industrial facility for one shift, and then they would typically send them to the landfill. But now we collect them, and we launder them, and we pair them back up, and we ship them out. We've shipped out more than 12,000 pairs of gloves across the country to stewardship programs, saving $19,000 for those gloves and diverting more than 900 pounds of waste from landfills. And so check out the Gloves for Good program. If you want some gloves, order them up. And then the Spring Challenge. So the Spring Challenge is the other place where we go to celebrate stewardship. It's where we celebrate all the work that we're doing and kind of show the collective impact that we're making. And so last year we had 36,000 hours representing $1.1 million poured into the field of stewardship. And in the Spring Challenge, we have morphed it to become the most inclusive Spring Challenge ever. And so now you can report your plantings, whether you plant a tomato or a prairie. You can report your cleanups, whether you clean up an urban lot or a beach or a field. You can report your invasive species work. You can report your prescribed fire work. You can report your monitoring. Monitoring, how about that as an under-celebrated form of stewardship? So encourage you all to check out the Spring Challenge. That'll kick off in April. As I said, our mission is to connect, equip, and mobilize people and organizations to care for land and water in their communities. And so we are so pleased that you are here today. If you're just joining us now, welcome. We're just going over a little bit of the Stewardship Network stuff. I'm going to orient you to the virtual hop-in room in which you are sitting, and then we'll kick off our keynote speech. So drop in the chat if you're just new, kind of making your way over to the main stage. Drop in the chat. Let us know where you're tuning in from. Welcome. We're so glad you're here and looking forward to learning from you and spending time with you. So before we go, you've made it this far. You're here, which is great. And you've made it to the main stage. So I want to give you a little bit more of a hop-in tour here. So you'll notice over on the left side of the screen, there are different icons. So there's the reception area, where you will find a description, and then you will also find the schedule, and where you can, kind of plan your days. There's a little ribbon next to each session, and as you're thinking about what you want to attend, just click that ribbon and it'll get added to My Agenda, which we'll tell you about in a little bit, so that you can customize your agenda and figure out where you want to go. Sponsors, we'll give a bigger shout out to them later on. They make it all possible, so you can see the sponsors there. Other areas that you'll find: the main stage, you're here now. We will be back here tomorrow morning, and we will be back here for the closing ceremony tomorrow. So that's where you are now. And the sessions are where you're going to find all of the concurrent sessions. So as you click the session button, you'll be able to scroll around and see those different sessions that you want to attend and click on them and hop in when they are live. You will see networking. Networking is one of my favorite places of this. So when you click on networking, you get taken to a speed networking option. And so I encourage people to make use of this. We started this last year, and what happens is you get put into a room with a random person, and you get, and I loved it. I had amazing conversations with people I hadn't known before, and then it's really fun also when you hop in there, and all of a sudden it's like, oh, Rob, great to see you. Let's catch up a little bit. And then what happens when you're in there is you have 3 minutes. You two can decide to hop out early or whatever. But what happens is you get a countdown, and if you would like to extend it, which I was in sessions where we extended them a couple times, you can click extend is what it says, and you will get another 3 minutes. And then the other thing that happens there is there's a connect button. So let me also just say, the other person has to agree. So you can say, I want to extend it, but then the other person has to accept it. So you're not just automatically in this endless loop of somebody wanting to talk to you forever. So then the other thing that happens in there is there's a connect button. So if you say, great, Dave, I'm talking to you, I'd really like to get your contact information, you say connect. And then the other person has to accept it. But then when that's happened, you two exchange contact information, and it gets put into your contacts that you can find later. So I encourage you all to make use of it. Really fun way to get connected to people and learn more. Expo Hall. It's a hand-selected short-form content that's meant to inspire. And so some of those are from past conference attendees, so I really encourage you. It's a great place. So when you go into the expo hall, again, you can scroll around. I really say just wander around the expo hall by scrolling, and you click on something, and it'll take you to a little bit there. You can also learn a little bit more about the Stewardship Network's programs there as well that are available to all, as I mentioned. And I really enjoy that. So during breaks, pop into the expo hall and wander around. And then replay at the very bottom is where the conference sessions that are recorded will be. So I know it's hard to choose which session you want to go to. They are all going to be recorded, and they will all go into the replay section so that you can go back and watch them, later on tonight, during a break, tomorrow, and beyond. So know that those will all be there for you to find. We also really want to take advantage of the networking opportunity. So not only is there the networking tab, but we will always have 2 open session rooms. And so they will be open all the time. And we encourage you during those 15-minute breaks to go take a break, wander around, get something to eat or drink and stretch, or hop into a networking room for a short bit. And one of the things that people have said about these these networking session rooms is that they've said, it's a lot like an in-person conference where you're sitting around a table with maybe 10 people in it, but 2 people are having a conversation and you're listening, or maybe it's a whole table conversation. So it's a great place to go. If you find yourself in a chat with somebody, because chats are available in all the session rooms, that you're having a chat that's starting to go off and spin off in another direction, you can say, hey, let's take this conversation to a networking room. And in the networking room, you will be able to have your audio and visual on. So you can see people. You can opt not to have your audio or your either on, but you can opt not to have your video on if you'd like to. And then know that we can also set up other dedicated networking rooms. So we've had folks in the past say, we'd like a networking room on invasive species, or we'd like one on prescribed fire, or we'd like one on working with volunteers. So just let us know. We want to encourage you all to have these kind of conversations. Any topic that you want, we can make this this room available in short order. So just let us know, and you can let us know by emailing staff@stewardshipnetwork.org. Drop it in the chat. If you find Rob specifically, let him know. He's doing all the back-end tech work, so just let us know. We want you to take advantage of that. So want to tell you about a couple accessibility options. So below the slide there, you see 5 icons or so. And on the left, you will see closed captions. So you can click on that so you can get closed captions. So if you want that for accessibility, you can do that. And then on the far right of those icons that are below the screen there, you can go to full screen. So you can take it to full screen and not see all the hop-in navigation. So I encourage you to make use of those if you would like. On the right-hand side, you will see my agenda. So that's the place where all of those sessions that you tagged in the schedule will go. So that's your personal agenda. The chat, I think you all have been using the chat already. Again, welcome. If you're just joining us, I encourage you to drop into the chat where you're tuning in from and let us know how things are going. You know, chat, you know, I was just part of Joe's Monarch session and it was so great. I encourage those of you who didn't see it to go to it. Or I just watched Lori's Knotweed session. Wow, she's got so much experience. So go ahead and drop into the chat and make use of that. People, you can find people and old friends. You can make new ones. I encourage you to go in there and you can request chats with people and you can go over to a private chat. I encourage you all to reach out and say, oh, hey, Rebecca, I didn't realize that you were here. I'd love to connect with you for a couple minutes. Let's go chat. And then here's a new one for us. So we've been having a greater presence on social media these days. And so hashtag TSN conference. Let's have a little fun with this, right? So TSN conference tab is there. And if you're on Instagram and Twitter, any public post where you hashtag TSN conference will show here. So I encourage you all to do that. Hey, I'm at the Stewardship Network conference. It's a great time. Hashtag TSN conference. If you're on Facebook, any public post where you hashtag TSN conference and tag the Stewardship Network at Stewardship Network will show here. So on this at Stewardship Network, what you need to do is you need to tag us. So I did it once where I just typed at Stewardship Network and didn't grab the tag. It won't show here. But go ahead and do that. Again, post about attending sessions, take a selfie of you, take a picture of your screen, let us know how things are going. Not on social media? Good for you. What you can do is you can click on that blue button there that says create with the little plus sign there, and you can again create a post right there and it'll pop in. So I really encourage you all to take advantage of that. If you have any problems whatsoever, email staff@stewardshipnetwork.org. We'll be monitoring that and there to help you. Can't thank our sponsors enough. Again, we really could not do this without you. We appreciate our conference allies, DNR Parks and Recs, and Resource Recycling Systems. We appreciate our community pillars. Again, thank you all so much. Encourage you all to visit these folks. There are links to them on our website that are on the sponsor page. So visit them, thank them. If you happen to see them, let them know. Our community supporters, again, thank you. We have sponsorship levels at all levels, and so we really appreciate and thank all of you at all levels, whether it's several $1,000s or whether it's $250. We really appreciate you and thank you. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. All right, I'm really pleased to introduce Dr. Alison Forrestel, who's the Chief of Natural Resources and Science at the Golden Gate National Recreation Area. I had the pleasure of getting to know Alison. Good morning, Alison.
Good morning.
I had the pleasure of getting to know Alison a couple of years ago when we were working on a project with the Golden Gate Biosphere Network, and it's been just a real pleasure to get to know Alison and the work that she does. And so when I knew that we were going to bring you all together again, I was like, let's learn a little bit from Alison. So Alison says her passion and expertise are in conservation and land management with a focus on fire and forest ecology, ecological restoration, climate change, and California natural history. She's committed to science-based management and thinking at the landscape scale. So we're in for a treat. Alison is the Chief of Natural Resources and Science for Golden Gate National Recreation Area, where she leads ecological restoration, management, and science program across 80,000 acres of the National Park Service lands and waters in and around San Francisco, California. She also leads the Golden Gate Biosphere Networks, which brings together land and water conservation organizations in the Bay Area under the umbrella of the UNESCO Biosphere Program. Her background and expertise are in conservation land management with a focus on fire and forest ecology, ecological restoration, landscape scale conservation, and creating park communities that are welcoming, inclusive, and relevant to all people. She's worked for the National Park Service for nearly 20 years, serving as the Fire Ecologist for the San Francisco Bay Area National Network National Parks and Vegetation Ecologist at Golden Gate National Recreation Area. She holds a PhD in Fire Ecology from the University of California, Berkeley, and a master's degree in Forest Ecology from Yale University School of the Environment. She grew up in the Great Lakes region and has been a resident of the San Francisco Bay Area for several decades, where she enjoys sharing the wonders of parks and local biodiversity with her two small children. So welcome, Alison. Thank you so much for joining us. Really pleased to be here with you.
Thank you so much for the introduction, Lisa. I'm so happy to be here today. I love listening to your opening remarks, even though we didn't really coordinate on my content. So much of what you were talking about will be themes through what I'm sharing today too. So that was really fun to see. So my talk today is about finding joy and hope in the practice of restoration. And the title, Reweaving, comes from a quote that I'll share in a few minutes. And the time I'll spend with you today will be really in three sections. I'm going to start out talking about joy in nature. And then the bulk of my time will be talking about hope and restoration and some of the work we've done in the national parks around San Francisco, restoring our landscapes. And then finishing with just some reflections on that work and some of the things we've learned along the way. So I want to start out today talking about joy and wonder. I think the work that we all do as stewards of the natural world, as part of the stewardship network, caring for the earth and caring for each other, has its foundations in joy and wonder. And that is specifically the joy and wonder that I think each of us finds in nature. So I wanted to start us out today grounded in that foundation. So I want to ask everyone to just take a couple of seconds and maybe shut your eyes and think about a time when you've been outside and just experienced, joy or awe or wonder and what it was that you saw, or maybe what you heard or even smelled, and just reflect on that moment. So what comes to mind for me, one of those moments, was the time that I first saw the sooty shearwater migration on the Pacific coast. My office is just north of the Golden Gate Bridge in Marin County and very close to the beach. There's a beach very close to where I work. And one day I was sitting at my desk, typing away on my keyboard, probably writing an email or something, and I looked out of my office window and saw this little gaggle of people out by the beach. They had a spotting scope, and I thought, maybe something interesting is going on out there. Maybe there's some dolphins in the surf, or I figured I'd take a break from what I was doing and go out and look. And when I got out to the edge of the beach, what I saw was just this river of birds. There were thousands and thousands of birds flying over the ocean, not too far out from the coast, from one horizon to the other, and they just kept coming and coming and coming. There are so many of them that a week later, I live in San Francisco, and I was on a morning run before work, out by the ocean, and they were still flying along the ocean horizon. It was incredible. And so what I found out is that these were sooty shearwaters, and they do each year this figure-8 circumnavigation of the Pacific Ocean. They fly 40,000 miles. And it's just so incredible to me that this, what an incredible physical feat, 40,000 miles. And the fact, we've been polluting the oceans, the habitat loss along our shorelines, the climate change, all of these things that have really messed up the ocean, and still this completely incredible phenomenon is still happening. And the other piece of it that blows me away is that, I'm a biologist, I do conservation. I've been working in the Bay Area for 20 years, and I had never heard of sooty shearwaters. I had never seen them. And so just that there's still this opportunity for discovery is so amazing to me and just makes me so happy and fills me with joy. And for me, that's the joy that brings me to work every day. I have a suspicion that that's the same case for many of you. And I think the potential for that joy is in every single person. And I think tapping into that is how we move the needle on conservation. And the reason I wanted to start out today centering on joy and wonder in nature is because so much of the work we do in conservation and stewardship is hard work. The tides that we're working against are huge. Global climate change, invasive species, habitat loss. It's big problems we're working collectively to fix. And so I just want to invite us all to keep coming back to that foundation of joy in doing this work, and an invitation to myself too, to keep remembering that. So there's two quotes I wanted to share with you all as we start out our time together today. And the first one is about this idea of, finding joy and wonder in nature. It's from the author, Rebecca Solnit, and I've taken the liberty to change it just a little bit, but the quote is, "We need now to tell stories about how beautiful, how rich, how harmonious the earth is, how beautiful its patterns are, and how much we can do to restore and protect it. To take that beauty as a sacred trust and celebrate it. Otherwise, we might forget why we're fighting." And I just love this quote. I think it's, these same ideas, and it's so eloquently said. So I wanted to share that this morning. So moving into the second part of my talk, where I'll be talking more about hope and restoration and some of the restoration work we've done in the Bay Area. But starting out first with another quote. This one is from the late conservationist and biologist E.O. Wilson. And what he said is, "There can be no purpose more inspiriting than to begin the age of restoration, reweaving the wondrous diversity of life that still surrounds us." And I agree, restoration is one of the things that gives me so much hope in the challenging times that we live in. And that's where the title of the talk came from, reweaving biodiversity, reweaving community. And so I'll share a couple of reweaving examples from my own work. First, I wanted to set the stage a little bit and share some about the place where I work, the Golden Gate National Parks. As Lisa mentioned, it's 80,000 acres of park lands in the San Francisco Bay Area. It spans 60 miles in 3 counties, so Marin County here in the north, San Francisco here kind of in the center of our parklands, and San Mateo County in the south. It's an incredibly biodiverse place, and I'll spend a little bit of time talking about that, but one of the statistics is more than 1,200 plant and animal species call this place home. It's embedded in an urban area, the city of San Francisco and the surrounding cities. And because of that, unlike a park like Yellowstone or Yosemite, where it's a big, chunk of land that's all contiguous, our park is in these 35 different distinct park sites, many of them surrounded by homes or urban landscapes, and that presents its own set of challenges in managing these places. It was established in 1972, so we just celebrated our 50th anniversary. And when it was established, it was very unique among the national park system. It was the first urban national park. So unlike these parks like Yellowstone and Yosemite, where most people need to drive many hours to get to them, this is bringing the parks to the people. So it's embedded in a large urban area with opportunity to reach so many people. And indeed, it is one of the most visited national parks in the whole country, usually number 1 or number 2. We get about 15 million visitors a year. So what an opportunity to light, so many people up to nature and connect them with the species that call this place home. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the biodiversity that makes this place so special. It's recognized as one of 25 global biodiversity hotspots as part of the California floristic province here. The Golden Gate National Parks is kind of right smack dab in the middle of that California floristic province. And part of the reason it's such a biodiverse region is because we have very high levels of beta diversity. And what that means is that there's many different habitat types in very close proximity to each other across the landscape. You might go through for a 2-hour hike and pass through, 5 or 6 different habitat types. So I wanted to talk about just a few of them, working kind of from top to bottom of this slide. On the top is rocky intertidal habitat. There's some black oyster catchers on this rock out in the Pacific Ocean. This next image is coastal prairie, so bunch grasses and native wildflowers, a very beautiful ecosystem with estuarine wetlands where saltwater and freshwater meet. Redwood forests, so Muir Woods National Monument is part of the lands that we manage. Freshwater wetlands, and I'll talk a bunch about a wetland restoration project that we did. And many more habitat types. Those are just a few of them to kind of give a flavor of the landscape. We also have 38 federally threatened and endangered species, which is more than any other national park unit in the continental United States. And on the one hand, that's a reflection of the incredible biodiversity of the place. And on the other hand, it's a really sad statistic, right? Because the reason these species are so rare and at the risk of blinking out is because they've lost so much habitat and because of what humans have done to their landscapes. And so I want to introduce you to a few of our special species. On the top left here is the Hickman's potentilla. This is a perennial wildflower with these adorable heart-shaped yellow leaves. It's found in San Mateo, south of San Francisco. There are only a few thousand individuals left in the world, and they're pretty much all within our parkland. So we feel a very large responsibility to protect and restore habitat for this flower. In the top center here are northern spotted owls. Folks may be familiar with them, the political lightning rod species in the Pacific Northwest starting in the 1990s related to logging. And the southern end of the range of this species is in Marin County, and it's actually one of the most robust and healthy populations in the entire range. So really important to the longevity of the species is the population that we have just north of San Francisco. This guy on the top right here is the California red-legged frog. This is a species actually, as you know, California population was exploding with the gold rush, was imperiled by being used as a food species. People were eating them, and it's doing better now, and it's somewhat widespread throughout our park. And we'll mention this one a little bit later. On the bottom right here is the Franciscan manzanita, and I'll share a whole story about restoration around this species. It's an extremely rare plant species, actually, that we for many decades thought was extinct. Bottom center here is the mission blue butterfly. This insect species is found just in the Bay Area, nowhere else, and it's one of the first insect species that was listed under the Endangered Species Act, and it has the claim to fame of being the first insect species to stop a housing development. And then the last I'll introduce you to here, these are some coho salmon. They spend part of their lifespan in our streams, and the other part of their lifespan out in the Pacific Ocean, and a huge amount of both ecological and cultural importance of these species. So just a few more things I'll touch on this slide that make the San Francisco Bay region and the Golden Gate National Park so unique and biodiverse. On the left here, what this is a map of is regions globally of coastal upwelling. And so there's this phenomenon that happens along the California coast where strong winds blow in from the northwest and they push warm surface waters out of the way, and you get this upwelling of really nutrient-rich cold water that forms the basis of this incredible, robust food web. The park is also located along the Pacific Flyway, so fully half of the species in North America pass through the park at some point during the year. And then this image on the right is a heat map of endemic species richness. And so the warmer colored areas are places where there's higher numbers of species that don't exist anywhere else. And so you can see there's a large diversity of species that are really found nowhere else in the world. So I mentioned that the parks were founded in 1972, and since that time, there has been a deep history of restoration work in these places. So this slide shows 3 different counties that make up the park. So Marin on the left, San Francisco in the center, and San Mateo on the right. The green areas are the protected parklands, and then the red and gray areas are places where we've done restoration work at some point over that 50-year time span of the park. And so just, an incredible depth of expertise and commitment to restoration and stewardship in these places. And before I go on to talk about some of those stories of the restoration work that we have done in these parks, I want to just pause and acknowledge that, before Europeans arrived in California, for thousands of years, the lands that are now the Golden Gate National Parks were stewarded and tended by the Federated Indians of Great and Rancheria, north of the Golden Gate Bridge, and the Ramaytush Ohlone people, south of the Golden Gate Bridge. The Park Service is working with the tribes towards co-stewardship agreements. Tribes remain deeply connected to the land, and we are trying to, write that relationship where there's, equal co-stewardship at the table. Vast ecological knowledge and this history of stewardship, those are not my stories to tell, but I didn't want to talk about the restoration work that we're doing without acknowledging that, deep past and expertise. Okay, so getting into the first restoration story I wanted to talk about, the Rodeo Wetland Restoration. This is a place that was a very impacted human landscape and that we restored into a freshwater wetland. This is a picture of it post-restoration. And first, I just wanted to set the kind of geographic context. This figure on the left is a map of California, and you can see the red box is where our park is and where this work is happening. So zooming in here, this is the Golden Gate Bridge. And the project area is just north of the Golden Gate Bridge out near the coast in Marin County. So zooming into the project area, that red polygon is where this restoration work happened. It's about a 6-acre area. And before we did the restoration, you can see a good chunk of it was this dirt parking lot. And so that was really the goal, is to convert this parking lot and the impacted lands upstream of it back into a freshwater wetland. And this green blob up here upstream of our project area is, an intact, healthy freshwater wetland. And we use that as a reference area for what we were targeting with this restoration work. So after Europeans colonized this area, the first land use starting around the early 1800s was ranching. And this is a picture of what the restoration area looked like during that ranching area. And you can see there's already, even that far back, a lot of changes. Clearly some earthwork was happening here with this dirt in the foreground. Ranch buildings were built right in the area that should be wetland. Roads were built. There's, a lot of livestock. Invasive grasses were brought in, both, accidentally as well as intentionally for forage. So a lot of human change on the landscape during the ranching era. And then starting in the late 1800s, these lands were acquired by the US Army. And so this large barrack structure was built out here. This area in the foreground, which is our restoration area, was used as a parade ground and for training exercises. And you can see it's very much not a wetland in this picture. A lot of work was done to take the water that was coming down off this watershed and put it into pipes and culverts underground and shoot it out to the ocean. And so there was a lot of work to do to repair this place. So some of the key project actions that we took on for this project, number one was decompacting the parking lot. You can imagine with, decades, centuries of human use, plus more recently cars parking on top of it all of the time. It was just, those soils were in no place to support plant life. And so that was one of our key project actions. We also needed to fill incised channels upstream of the parking area. A bunch of large gullies had formed upstream of the parking area. I think I have a picture in here of one of them. So you can imagine if someone's standing here, their head wouldn't even reach up to the ground level. And what these gullies do is they draw water to the bottom of it. They shoot that water straight out to the ocean and drying up effectively, the surface level above the gully. And, those areas at the edges of the gully were no longer supporting wetland vegetation because the gully was just drying them. So we needed to fill those incised channels, remove the historic drainage features. I mentioned, culverts, pipes under the ground. There was a lot of crazy stuff going on underneath, especially the parking lot area of the project. And then, of course, revegetation was a huge part of this effort. Once the major earthwork was done, there was a ton of work to do. Thousands of native plants were planted out on this site. So I wanted to just share a few pictures of what the project, looked like during construction. This is a picture of the parking area right after it's been decompacted. And you can see the soil is much looser and looks like, a root might be able to get a hold in there. We did a lot of plant salvage. So, for example, at the bottom of those incised gullies, which we were filling, there were some really nice native wetland plants. And so we dug those up and set them to the side and then replanted them on the site once we had our final grades in place. As you might imagine, erosion was a huge concern on the project site. It's a big area, 6 acres. And so, in the interim period before plant roots were able to get established, we were really worried about all of that soil moving off the site and into the ocean and new gullies forming. And so this is what the project looked like immediately after construction. You can see this erosion fabric, straw wattles to slow down the flow of water. A lot of effort was put into making sure that the soil stayed where we wanted it. We used a revegetation technique known as pre-vegetated coir mats. And what these are, this almost like the sod that a person might use in, to put a lawn in their backyard. And so you can see in the foreground here, this is a piece of erosion blanket. It has Scirpus microcarpus growing in it. And those were grown out in a nursery. So the erosion blanket was in the nursery with the Scirpus seedlings in it, and they were growing in there. And you can see they were delivered onto the site in these rolls you see in the image and just rolled out. And that was a method that had been used really successfully in other national park restoration areas around the state. And for us, actually, it failed. I think the plants maybe were too small, and so they didn't have root contact with the soil. We also had an historic drought hit right when we did this project, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a few minutes. But all of the plants in this pre-vegetated coir mat actually died, and then we had to replant plants back into it. So that was certainly a challenge of this project. In terms of communicating the work that we did on this project, one of the tools we used is what we call plant cams. And so what we did is we took wildlife cameras and we set them up at various locations on the project site and set them to take, still images at a repeated interval. And then we stitched all those together to get a time lapse of, the vegetation recovering on the site. And I'm going to play one of those plant cam videos for you now. It shows a time span from 2013 to 2016. So right after the project happened in 3 years post, and you can just see the amazing explosion of growth. Let's see if I can get this to play here. Okay, there we go. So it's not, first class cinematography, but I just love the way that this, you can really see the bare spots disappear and the wetland plants getting bigger and more robust and just filling in and turning into this incredible place, even over that 3-year period during a drought. So just communicating what happened on the project in a different way. These are some panoramic images looking down at the project site from a trail up above it. You can see what it looked like beforehand. These are the cars parked. A couple cars were parked on the parking lot the day that photograph was taken. And then below, you see it during construction with heavy equipment out on the site, and work is happening. And then this is what it looked like 5 years later. All of this is dense, diverse wetland plants. It's so incredible, the resilience of nature. And so what are some of the benefits of this project? You know, incredible biodiversity. All sorts of species of birds use this place. The first year after construction, we had California red-legged frogs hopping around out there. I see coyotes out there. It's, you know, the animals are using it. There's a diversity of wetland plants. Also benefits for carbon storage. I did a back of the envelope carbon calculator for this site and calculated that it stores as much carbon as 130 vehicles taken off the road for a year. So storing carbon both in the plant material and in the soil. Groundwater storage. Without those gullies shooting the water straight out to the ocean, the water is able to spread out across the site, infiltrate slowly, support this diverse community of wetland plants, recharge our groundwater. And then, of course, beauty. I'm part of why I love this project so much is it's really very close to my office. My office is one of those barracks buildings, which I showed earlier. And so I get to walk out there often, and every time I do, it just lights me up to know that this place used to be a parking lot and now it's this incredible, beautiful place. Okay, so shifting gears to the other reweaving story I want to tell. The first, that wetland story, was really, you know, about transforming a place. And the second story of the Franciscan manzanita is the story of bringing a species back from what we thought was extinction. Again, I'll just quickly set the geographic context for where this work happens. So you have California zooming into the Bay Area. And this project happened in San Francisco, in the Presidio of San Francisco, south of the Golden Gate Bridge. So the Franciscan manzanita is a species that's endemic to the city of San Francisco and has never been found anywhere else in the world. And it was once widespread throughout the city, but as the gold rush in the city was developed, it lost more and more of its habitat. Until by the 1930s, really, it was only restricted to the west side of the city, and the only habitat left for it was the city's cemeteries. That was really the only open space where this species was persisting. And you can see in this picture, this is one of the cemeteries in San Francisco. I think this was taken in 1938, and this is Franciscan manzanita growing down this little rocky bluff in the cemetery. The woman in the photograph is Alice Eastwood. She was a botanist at that time, and she, cataloged some of the early scientific specimens for this species and plays a very important role in this story that I'll get to in just a second. But the city did a very crazy thing in the 1940s. After World War II, the population of the city was expanding, and it was determined that more space was needed for housing. And the city actually took on this project of moving the cemeteries out of the city. So graves were exhumed. They were moved to this town called Colma, south of San Francisco. And the last habitat for this species was lost. Alice Eastwood, being the wise and foresightful woman that she was, she knew this was the end of this species. And so she had 4 individuals dug up and moved out of the cemetery and relocated to a number of botanical gardens in the East Bay and in Southern California, so that even if this species was going to go extinct in the wild, at least there would be a few, living in captivity in botanical gardens. And so that's what happened. And at that point, in 1947, the species was believed to be extinct in the wild. This is the intersection where that cemetery would have been now. So you can see it's completely developed city landscape. The road here is ironically named Manzanita. So the irony in this photo is rich. So fast forward to 2009, we've all thought this species was extinct. It doesn't exist in the park. It's a very sad story. And Caltrans, which is the Department of Transportation for the state of California, is doing a very large road project realigning the approach to the Golden Gate Bridge. And as part of that project, they needed to cut back some trees and vegetation in a place that was going to get paved over. And so they did that. And in this spot right here, hopefully you can see that red circle. I'll put my arrow to it too. A local botanist was driving by, like highway speeds, driving by this approach to the Golden Gate Bridge, and he looks out of his window and he's like, gosh, that looks like a manzanita that he could see because the other vegetation had been cut away. And so he came back with some of the park staff, and this is the site, lo and behold, on this tiny, forgotten piece of habitat, this median strip, the last wild Franciscan manzanita had been hanging on all of this time. Just like, what an incredible discovery. Unfortunately, the road project had to go on. The place where this plant was, going to be paved over, and there was nothing that could be done about it. And so the park worked with Caltrans and actually had this plant, the Franciscan manzanita, we also call her the mother plant or Francie, moved to a location in the park where she could be preserved long-term, where she could live out a long and hopefully prosperous life. And so that happened. I mean, you can see it was a huge endeavor, weighed, I don't know how many thousands of pounds with that giant root ball. It had to be craned out of this median location onto a flatbed truck. The Golden Gate Bridge had to be closed for this to be happen. So it was a big undertaking. And what an amazing, happy story, right? This species we thought was extinct, coming back from presumed extinction. But it also was a biological dead end, because this species of manzanita can't self-pollinate. So although we have this one individual, there was no hope of another generation. However, going back to the wise Alice Eastwood, there were a few individuals that had been preserved in botanical gardens. And one of our biologists on the park staff did some research and learned about these specimens that had been preserved. He reached out to the botanical gardens, found out which ones they were and where they were, and that they were still persisting. And we worked with our park nurseries to take cuttings, both from the mother plant and from these individuals in botanical gardens, and grow them out into new plants. And so we prepared 8 different sites around the Presidio of San Francisco with restoration so that we could outplant these different genetic individuals. So far, 202 individuals of 4 different genotypes have been planted out in the Presidio. And this actually, 2023 is the first year this species can produce in more than 80 years. The plants are finally big enough that they're able to produce flowers of multiple genotypes, are able to produce flowers. So this is really the first time that they can start a new generation. I just went out there as I was thinking about putting the slides together for this talk yesterday morning. And so this is one of the restoration sites here. You can see some flowers. It's just starting to be the blooming species for the Franciscan manzanita on this individual here. And there's actually 3 individuals in this photo. There's a little one behind it and another big one back here. So this might be the place where the first seeds of the next generation are pollinated and germinate and the new generation starts. And just for me, that's such a story of hope that with a little help, we can bring this species back from what we thought was extinction. So shifting into kind of the concluding part of my talk, I wanted to just share some reflections on my learnings from these projects and other projects. And the first one I want to talk about is adaptability, the incredible importance of adaptability. Things will not go as planned. One example of this is with the wetland restoration project that I talked about. Construction was set to kick off in the beginning of October of 2013. And that happened to be when the federal government shut down. Congress decided not to fund the federal government. The parks were all closed. We were told we couldn't go to work and we weren't going to get paid. And it was like, oh my God, what are we going to do about this project? We were able to get an exception. And so the contractors were able to come and do the work because the contract was already in place. And we got an exception for a staff member to come on site and be the project manager during that work, but it was certainly like a huge, unexpected, and very stressful hurdle to that project. Also, I mentioned we had an historic drought that hit right when this project started. So from 2012 to 2016, California had 4 consecutive extremely dry winters. Winters is when we get almost all of our precipitation. And, it was something that had never previously been seen on the historic record, probably hadn't happened for thousands of years prior, and just, not the conditions under which one wants to start a wetland restoration project. And we did have to make some adjustments to our plan. Some of the species that we planted were just too water dependent to be able to survive in what was an unexpectedly droughty environment and, shifted to other wetland plants that could tolerate just a little bit more drying. And so the species composition on the site turns out to be different from what's in our reference site, but it's still this incredible diversity of wetland species. So just that adaptability to pivot as you go is critical. Resilience is certainly one that rises to the surface for me. I mean, gosh, this went from a parking lot to an incredibly beautiful wetland. The resilience of nature to recover, it doesn't take that much from us humans for her to spring back to life. And I think maybe there's a lesson there for us too, as stewards, the importance of our own resilience and taking care of ourselves as we do this work. Another lesson that came up for me in thinking about this work is the importance of storytelling. These projects are so hopeful, and getting the word out, that we can do this work, that we are doing this work, I think is incredibly important. With the wetland restoration project, we didn't do a great job of storytelling on it. There's a wayside exhibit out there, so if a person, hikes by, they will see what happened at that place. But beyond that, we really didn't do a lot of, press or outreach. With the Manzanita story, on the other hand, we did do a really amazing job of it. And I just wanted to share a few of the headlines from the course of this project, which I think are pretty fun. The first one is from the High Country News. The tagline is "Finding the Ivory-billed Woodpecker of the Plant World." The Los Angeles Times picked it up. A San Francisco plant once thought to be extinct is still hanging on. KQED, which is our local San Francisco NPR affiliate, 15 months later, rediscovered San Francisco plant thrives. CNN picked it up. Coastal plant thought extinct for 65 years, discovered, put on endangered list. And this is from the San Francisco Chronicle. I think this is a great headline. Sex and Shrubbery. Presidio biologists seek mates for San Francisco's loneliest plant. And so just the importance of getting these stories out there because they are hopeful and because, this work is so important. And then the last sort of reflection that I wanted to touch on is the importance of community in doing this work. All of our stewardship and restoration work happens in partnership with volunteers. This past year, our team, I think, had 500 volunteers leading, invasive plant removal or planting or other stewardship work for 5,000 hours. And what a lift for us to get this help, and then also to, connect the community to the parks as they're rebuilding the ecological community. And I love this picture. I wanted to talk a little bit about this picture. This is just from Martin Luther King Day this past January, Martin Luther King Day of Service. This is my amazing colleague, Becca Au, leading a volunteer program at one of our restoration sites. And she just happened to run into this little guy in the middle, Ezra. He's my son's friend from kindergarten. And his family had gone out to volunteer, and they somehow figured out the connection that they both knew me and took this selfie. And I just love it, the threads of community being woven together. It makes me so happy to see that. So in conclusion, I wanted to circle back to where I started, talking about joy and love of nature. And I wanted to end with another quote. It's from the book Moth Snowstorm. And that book is about the importance of joy and love and wonder in nature. And the quote is talking about how what we need for conservation is to marry our joy in the natural world with our understanding of the seriousness of the crisis to form what the book calls a new kind of love of nature. And so the quote is, "It will be a love which is informed, but it will also be a love which, recognizing the scale of the threat, is engaged. A love which, in delighting in a flower or a bird or a meadow or a marsh or a lake or a forest or a range of grasslands, realizes that it may not be there next year and will do whatever it can to protect or save it. A love which can be fierce." So with that, I will conclude, and thank you all so much for your time, and happy to answer any questions you may have.
Alison, thank you so much. That's so great, right? And I know so many of you online can relate to so many aspects of what Alison was sharing. Just really, really, really wonderful. And the whole piece of adaptability and resilience and storytelling. And I think you're right. I think many of us don't tell our stories often enough. And then the community part of it is also what brings joy to it. It's what keeps us informed and inspired. So we're going to have, Rob's going to be the voice of the chat, and we do have a couple questions. So Rob, take it away.
All right, we have one from Celia. Are there other species of manzanita in your area?
Yes, we have many species of manzanita, and we sort of talk about the Franciscan manzanita as being one individual left, although we have planted out many more now. There's actually another species of manzanita, the Raven's manzanita, which has only one individual left in San Francisco as well. So those are two very endangered manzanita species. And then there are many other, some somewhat rare or more common manzanita species too. California is actually sort of a center of manzanita diversity. So it's a really cool genus of plant.
Great. And then she also says, please report back next year to let us know if the Franciscan manzanita makes babies.
I can't wait to see. I will.
That's great. That's great. We'll definitely we'll communicate that to all of you.
So then Mitch asks, the video is an amazing communication tool. Was your trail cam set to take an image every couple of days?
That is a good question. I don't know the answer of the interval at which it was taking photos. I would have to go back to the folks who set it up and report back on that. I don't know if it was every few days or once a day or once a week. I'm not sure exactly.
Great, thank you. And then Maya has a question. That parking lot deconstruction looked pretty intense. You addressed the erosion concerns, but was there very much pressure from invasive species as a result of all the disturbance and equipment being used on the site?
Yes, there was a lot of pressure from invasive species. Cape ivy was a big one that's present all around the site, and we've done a lot of work to get rid of. And if folks are used to managing that species, it's so hard. It takes just the tiniest fragment of a leaf node or a root node to grow a whole new plant. So you have to be extremely meticulous in removing it. We also had a lot of invasive grasses. That was probably the other big one. We had a patch of Detrichia pop up, which is an early detection weed for us. So we got on that very quickly. So, I would say we had intensive invasive species removal, folks doing sweeps out there probably once a month for the first 5 years after the project, and are still continuing, to have to sweep the site less often, but with regularity to keep the invasives at bay.
Great, thank you. We have one from Anonymous, so mysterious. Your wetland restoration project. What was the approximate cost to execute such a successful restoration project of that size and scale and scope?
That's a great question. It was an expensive project. I don't know the exact figure off the top of my head, but it was in the ballpark of around 2 million. So it is expensive.
Got it. And then can you tell us more about beta diversity? Is there alpha diversity?
There's alpha, beta, and gamma. I don't know if I'm going to pass this test though. So beta is habitat types in close proximity. Alpha, I think, is just, regular species diversity. So how many different species you have on your site. I'm pretty sure there's gamma too, but I don't think I can define it.
No worries. And then one more, and then I think I'll pass it to Lisa if she has any thoughts for you. But how do you take changing climate regimes into account when planting and planning for restoration?
It's a really good question, and it's one that we are really wrestling with in this moment. We have built a pilot tool, and what it does is you can take your restoration site and it runs in the background the GCMs, the climate models, to project what the climate is going to be like at your restoration site 50 years in the future. And then based on that, it shows you across the landscape where you should be collecting seed for your plant propagation, based on a future climate. I will say we built the tool, but we aren't really using it yet. We're still, struggling on the policy side of, keeping local genotypes and not mixing. And so active area of growth and increasing our understanding, and then getting our policy to match up with what we're actually doing on the ground. I think maybe the sort of step down, simpler version of that would be, kind of the hedging your bets approach, where, one would collect seed for plant propagation from a bunch of different, microclimates, and then hopefully something there matches up with a future climate. but the modeling approach is even more sophisticated, and we're just trying to get that fully incorporated into our practices. But that's a great question.
Thank you so much. And then we have a request to please share the reading list you referred to, perhaps post-conference. And with that, I just want to let you know that we're getting a ton of great feedback in the chat about the story and about your presentation. So thank you so very much for joining us for the conference. And I will pass it back to Lisa to close us out.
Great, thanks. So Alison, one of the other things, so I had a question about the Manzanita root ball. How deep are the Franciscan Manzanita roots?
I think they're quite deep, and I'm sure that root ball did not get all of the roots, but happily it was enough that she could persist once moved to her new location.
Yeah, that looked like quite the Herculean effort.
It was amazing that that happened.
Yeah.
Really, really cool.
Yeah, thanks so much for sharing that with us. You know, one of the things, let me ask you one other question, because I know that in the final minutes that we have here together, one of the things, while we have you, talk about how you're thinking about fire in California and at the Golden Gate National Recreation Area. It's curious for us a little bit more out here in the Great Lakes with a little more water and a little less fire and those kinds of things.
Yeah, it's a big question. And I think the first thing that is important to say when talking about fire is that it's so regionally specific. So fire in the Bay Area is totally different than fire in the Sierra Nevada, the mountains of California, you know, which, as you're saying, again, is different from fire in the Great Lakes. And so there's, of course, this temptation to have a one-size-fits-all solution to returning fire to our landscapes, and it's just not that simple. I think the other thing that's really important to say is that wildfire and fire regimes are different now than they were, 10 or 20 years ago because of climate change. And so fires are burning hotter, they're burning bigger, they're doing things that they wouldn't have done in the past. So, returning fire to the landscape is really important. And then I think how you do it and where you do it just really needs to be tailored to the specific ecosystem that you're working in.
Yeah, that's so true. Well, Alison, I want to thank you so much for bringing joy and hope in the restoration world. And one of the things that maybe you all can do is drop in the chat your own, either your own learnings or your own successes. I know that you all online, I know personal stories from some of you where you've also had a plant that you thought was gone and hadn't been seen in 60 years come back because of the land and the plants responding to the stewardship work and the care that you were giving them. So drop into the chat some of the stories that you've undertaken, and knowing that that they take a long time and that you all are doing that. And I look forward to being with you throughout the next couple of days. Let me give you a couple reminders. Remember, use those navigation tabs on the left-hand side. We're going to take about a 5-minute break here, and presenters, go ahead and get into your session room, and then we'll be joined in the sessions. And then after that, we'll have our first 15-minute break. And so again, I encourage you to go ahead and take a break, but also hop into the networking sessions or explore the expo hall. It's been wonderful being with you. We're really looking forward to being together. Hope you can join us after that hour-and-a-half break that happens at the 7 p.m. on the Eastern time zone, 4 o'clock in California, for the stories that the lands hold. Looking forward to that, and then I'm looking forward to being with you again tomorrow. So again, thank you all so much, and thank you so much for sharing so much in the chat and already being a part of making this a really dynamic event. So thank you so much, and I'll see you in a session room.